Good afternoon and welcome to today's Rise Up Coalition webinar. Today, we are talking about the new hybrid, providing access to technology and broadband and powerful use. We are focused today on talking about how we can leverage technology to provide opportunities to students of color so that they can thrive in education. We are the Rise Up Coalition. We are putting on a series of webinars, and our members, I think Dwayne can show our member slide there. We are convened by Camelback Ventures, Digital Promise, the Surge Institute, the Pajara Institute, Education Leaders of Color, and Unidos US. We brought together districts, charter networks, and organizations led by people of color to find solutions that work for our students. Our why is that the ripple effects of historically inequitable institutions, from education to healthcare to housing and beyond, continue to inflict long-lasting impacts on our students and our families of color. The system will undoubtedly default to traditional approaches because of the lack of awareness of systems, models, and programs natively designed to meet the needs of students of color. The time is now, and the moment is urgent for BILPOC-led organizations to lead an unprecedented opportunity. Join us in our efforts to take action. Our goal is to publish a national action agenda reflective of the priorities and needs of students of color. We will amplify policies, models, practices, and programs and tools that celebrate, honor, and enable students of color to thrive. The process we're using to do that is to bring the coalition together to identify themes, priorities, actions, and demonstrations. Today, you will hear from a few people who are in the field leading some of those best-in-class examples of what is possible. I'm joined today by Norma Fernandez. Norma is the CEO of Everyone On, a nonprofit organization dedicated to creating social and economic opportunity by connecting low-income families to affordable internet service and computers and delivering digital skills training. Norma has worked in the corporate sector in Los Angeles on various economic development projects. With me today also is Millie Sanchez. Millie was one of the founders of the SLAM program and curriculum. She has been instrumental in the creation and expansion of the SLAM charter network, from one school in 2012 to over 12 charter schools in 3 states to date. Prior to joining SLAM, Ms. Sanchez worked with over 25 nonprofit charter school networks and assisted in the inception of 68 charter schools in Florida and across the country. She also served as a teacher and an administrator with Miami-Dade Public Schools. Eunice Mitchell is a regional director at Big Picture Learning, an organization dedicated to activating the power of schools, system, and education through student-centered, real-world learning. With approximately 65 schools in 26 states in the United States and even more schools abroad, Big Picture Learning partners with schools and districts to create teaching and learning environments that provide students with the knowledge, relationships, dispositions, and abilities that will help them thrive in college, career, and life. Finally, with me today is, Aaliyah Henderson Rosser. Aaliyah is the Executive Director for Instructional Technology at Atlanta Public Schools. In that role, she leads the work of the department in 4 major areas: creating innovative teacher leaders, online professional learning for instructional technology, impact of instructional technology on teaching and learning, and the implementation of 21st century teaching and learning through digitally connected classrooms. Aaliyah is a lifelong educator, serving as a middle school science teacher, instructional technology specialist, and founder of the DeKalb Online Academy. Please join me in welcoming these experts to the discussion today. I'm going to start with asking you all your why. I talked a little bit about the why of the coalition, but we'd love to hear from you about why you're in this work. I'm going to start with you, Eunice.
Awesome. First of all, thank you. I mean, I'm in the presence of greatness and I want to honor that. Thank you for this opportunity. And the why question is a really good one. I think it's one we have to constantly surface. And I will say that I am the daughter of parents who were raised and influenced by the Jim Crow South, as I think most of us have some of that to some degree. And I knew that I was my ancestors' greatest dream. My parents fed that into my soul very early. To be young, to be gifted, to be talented, to be Black was a beautiful thing in my home. And then partly because I recognized that education is a true revolution for change, and that was where I needed to thrive, and as a young person. And then, if I'm being honest, partly because as a new mom, before I started in education, I asked myself, what would I be willing to sacrifice my time, if not to be with my children and with my husband for that matter? And this service role of being in education and being with young people on the journey was the only thing that I could really answer with. And the final thing I'll offer is my why is also linked into the fact that I went through school, very traditional school experience, always feeling like I could only show up halfway, that only half of me really showed up. It was the part that was, listening, still, quiet, compliant, and it was very unfulfilling. And I knew that if there was anything that I could do to change any part of the world, it had to be with young people and in education. So I do this work for my ancestors, I do this work for my children, and I do this work to allow others to have a different opportunity. And again, not to say mine was bad, but it could have been so much more if I could have shown up complete. So I hope others can.
Thank you, Eunice. Aaliyah, would you like to share your why?
My why is pretty unconventional. How I ended here, both parents were educators. I grew up in DeKalb County schools, in DeKalb County here in Georgia, which is predominantly African-American county, and I saw lots of professional Black and brown people. So it was when I was growing up, very exciting. So I set out to be this doctor, majored in biology, minored in chemistry. Education was far from my mind. I came home and my mother was like, you need to become a paraprofessional. Like, you need to do something because I don't know what you're doing. And I'm still trying to figure myself out. So I end up going into education as a teacher assistant. And I must say there was something about teaching my own. I don't know what that was. It resonated with me. I wanted them to know, and even as a teacher's aide, I wanted them to know and understand what they could be, and then to be able to shape that and contribute to that. And we had days when we were dressed up as scientists, and just to see the excitement in their eyes, and I thought, this is where I'm supposed to be. And that kind of turned into a love of, I want all teachers to do this for students. And so I ended up being in professional learning, where I had a touch on teachers to be able to impact more and more kids. And so it was one of those things that was natural for me. I didn't set out to do it by any means. And I think my career trajectory has been very unconventional. Just as I've come into education, it's been unconventional. And I'm in a position now where I can say, our learners can use technology in ways that we haven't thought of before. So I feel like that evolution of me, the core of me is still there. I've just evolved in different ways, but it is the joy of my life to and I work in an urban district and primarily African-American district. It is the joy of my life to see kids thrive and do and be all that they can be. And it brings me a lot of joy. So I think it's the kids. That's my why. And I'm just happy to be working and getting paid for doing something that I love every single day.
Thank you, Aaliyah. Millie, you want to share your why with us?
And well, basically my whys is very similar to you all. I actually am an immigrant to this country. And when we came over, I was 8 years old. And probably those first 6 months of my schooling experience were a shock. I didn't speak the language. I thought it was just a very, I don't want to say traumatic, but it was really something that impacted me. And I think it was that from that moment on, I knew I wanted to master the English language because I just struggled so much, right? And back then, I'm talking, this was many years ago. Back then, what they considered English language learner program was basically my teacher was bilingual. That was about it. So it was just a very tough time. And then eventually, the following year, I moved schools, and a teacher just changed my life. And then, we moved to Miami in high school, and then a teacher changed my life. And there were so many teachers that really just had an impact. And I ended up getting an English degree and saying, this is what I want to do. I don't want students to feel what I felt, coming into a situation, realizing I don't think I can do this. And I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to be a teacher. But I think having said that, my parents always instilled the value of an education. They cleaned floors, they did whatever they needed to do in this country so that I could go on to college. So I'm a first generation college grad. And I think I always wanted to just instill that in my students. Soon after, I became a teacher in the high school where I went, and I thought I was going to change the world. It's an inner city high school here in Miami. And then I quickly realized, kids are falling through the cracks. And, it was also a very impactful time because there was a lot of bureaucracy, and I kept saying, this curriculum's not working. My kids don't, they're dropping out. I taught, 16-year-olds. I was in that threshold, and we were going into kind of that mode of new state testing, and everything was about the state test. And we were losing kids left and right. And again, I think that's one of the other milestones that had such an impact, because I was one of these young teachers who I started teaching at 21, and I wanted to change the world. And when I felt that sense of there's nothing I can do about this, I was even more driven. I ended up becoming a principal. I ended up going into charter. I ended up founding, the program that I thought would engage kids, which is SLAM, where, you use a love of sports to really connect them with, hey, there's all these careers and all these opportunities for you. So for me, it was just, I wanted to keep doing things to just, what can I do that is really going to get, kids are going to get it. They're going to want to stay engaged. They're going to want to stay in school, and not just any kids, but the kids that needed that kind of support system. So for me, it's just really been one, parental guilt, as you have to do well because this is what we sacrifice for you. But also, just, I think it's on us. And if we don't do anything about it, the status quo will stay the status quo. So for me, the schools that I work with now, including Matter Academy, collectively serve over 23,000 students, predominantly minority students. And I think that the reason I work with these schools, they're in underrepresented communities, or, my communities. And they reinforce that deeply rooted belief that I have, that every child can excel, but every child has to have the opportunity to do so. And for me, the why is, it's on me, it's on us to do that work.
Thank you, Millie. Norma, would you like to share your why?
Sure. Thank you for that question. I am a daughter of immigrants, born and raised, and I like to say educated in Los Angeles in the 80s and 90s, when unfortunately my community where I grew up, plagued by poverty, gang violence, just, unfortunate sort of conditions for families like mine and others that were low income. And so having witnessed the disparities and the inequities that really did not create opportunities that we saw, I think really drove my personal mission, which has always been about making sure that our communities have access to resources, to information and tools that they need in order to really participate and thrive in our society. And so that's my why, making sure, again, people have access to resources, to information, to opportunities so that they could do with it what they will. And with a particular focus on communities of color. From an everyone on standpoint, why we're participating in this very important coalition is because we cannot talk about educational equity, racial equity, social equity without talking about digital inclusion and digital equity. So making sure our communities, particularly low-income communities of color, have access to the technology that they need in order to participate in their educational journeys, but also to be able to thrive in our what's becoming increasingly our digital economy and society.
Thank you, Norma. I realize I didn't say who I was. I'm Lydia Logan. I'm at Digital Promise. And in my day job, I run the Verizon Innovative Learning Schools program. We have hundreds of schools across the country. We're working with them, providing technology, access, professional learning, IT support, and community. And I'm in this work and have been in this work for most of my career. 3 of my 4 grandparents were teachers. And it was always very important in our family that you get your education, that the one thing that could not be taken away from you as a Black person in America was the knowledge that you gained in school. And that could carry you forward and create opportunities for you. And that not only should you go to school, you should help others get that same chance. And so for me, it's what brings me to my job, my career, my passion, and exciting to work with my colleagues on this coalition and to be here with you all today. So let's get right into the discussion, into the topic. I'm going to start with Norma. Recent statistics show that the federal government is estimating 21.3 million Americans, or 6.5% of the population, lacks reliable internet access. And everyone on is working to address that. Most, if not all, school districts have provided connectivity for students. But if the lack of internet access is still an issue, where can families find low-cost options?
Sure. I'm so glad that this is part of the conversation, because as I mentioned earlier, and especially in a pandemic environment where students are still being asked to participate in distance learning, and it's certainly an option for them if they want to continue to do that. We need to make sure that the students and their families have the tools that they need at home in order to continue to participate in distance learning. But even beyond that, right, we've always needed technology, certainly in the last few years, especially internet connectivity and high-speed internet service, robust devices in order to support students' learning. I'll share really quickly that the Pew Research Center conducted a poll right at the beginning of the pandemic last year, so April 2020, and they were already anticipating that the pandemic was going to create huge disparities when it came to internet access, which was going to impact educational outcomes. So they wanted to get a sense of what are the challenges that parents are going to be experiencing. And based on that poll, they found that about 1 out of 5 parents with children that were going to be participating in distance learning were going to face difficulties with their homework assignments, specifically submitting their homework assignments, because 21% of those parents reported not having a computer at home. 22% of those parents said that they were reliant on public Wi-Fi or other Wi-Fi solutions to stay connected. So they were likely going to a Starbucks, to the library, to McDonald's, right? And we saw a lot of those stories during the pandemic where students were sitting outside of a Taco Bell or a McDonald's to get access to the internet to participate in distance learning. And lastly, 29% of parents reported that their students were going to be doing their homework via a smartphone. And we know that many administrators and teachers observed that firsthand, where students were needing to do their homework participate in peer discussions on their smartphones, right? That's not ubiquitous access. That is not equity when students, especially low-income community or low-income students of color, are being forced to, because of lack of access or affordability, to conduct their assignments that way. So at Everyone On, for the last few years, we've been working on this issue well before the pandemic, because guess what? We all know this, the digital divide existed before the pandemic. It just shed this spotlight on it, right? Thank goodness, because now we're beginning to address it. But we've been working on it for a number of years, and specifically actually working with K-12 school districts and other organizations throughout the country to inform households that there are options out there when it comes to low-cost internet service programs. There are options for robust, affordable computers. And I'll link our website onto the chat box, but definitely want to invite people to visit our website so that you could find what low-cost options might be available for the families that you serve. We know that because of the pandemic, a lot of school districts, if not all of them, really responded to the need by providing hotspots and computers to students, which is wonderful. But as we all know and have learned anecdotally from parents, sometimes that's just not enough, right? One hotspot in a household for a household of 5 people is not going to provide that quality of service that a student needs in order to fully participate. And so there are a number of programs out there by the internet service providers that start at $10 a month for high-speed in-home wireline service, which is great. That should be our end goal. Hotspots are one solution, but they're not a full solution. We need in-home wireline service, high speed, that really supports people's participation, students' participation in their education. So want to invite people to visit our website. You'll find there that we've aggregated a number of low-cost internet service options that families could leverage. What's exciting, and I'll also link this in the chat box, is that the Federal Communications Commission recently launched what is now called the Emergency Broadband Benefit. So for a period of time, people will receive a $50 subsidy towards their high-speed internet service at home, which is amazing. And it's really targeting low-income communities. So folks that are participating in Lifeline, or maybe they have students that are participating in the National School Lunch Program, or receive food benefits. As long as they meet one of those criteria and are considered low income, they're eligible for this $50 subsidy. If families are in a tribal community, they're eligible for up to $75 a month subsidy, which is great. And these are the kind of programs that we need. This particular program, the Emergency Broadband Benefit, is unfortunately a short-term program because it's an emergency response. So we're hoping that as many families as possible participate so that we could show that there is a demand, there is a need for these kind of services in order to start fostering digital equity in our country.
Thank you, Norma. That takes us right into sort of how our districts and charter networks, we saw a lot change during the pandemic, right? And we've spent a lot of time talking about how students get devices. And now we are at risk of people considering sort of going back to the way that we did things before and kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, Aaliyah, is that possible? You're at APS, right? You've been doing this work for a long time and managing the sort of race to the top that you worked on across the district to really press forward on innovative ways of teaching and learning. So I'd love to hear what's happening at APS and how do we prevent this backslide?
Yeah, Lilia, that's a great question to think about, pre-pandemic and then where we are post-pandemic. It feels good to be able to say post-pandemic, number one. We're almost there, I think. So I'll just say our D-Day was March 13th. We thought we were coming back in 2 weeks. I don't know what everybody else thought. I think I left my lunch bag in my office because I just knew I was gonna be back. And we didn't make it back, and we had to move everything to virtual learning. And fortunately for us, we have an infrastructure that supports, we have people that support teachers in technology integration. So I'm not gonna say it was easy, but we had support people that were there for teachers to say, okay, now this is what you do. these are the tools that you use. And then with that infusion of CARES funding or ESSER funding, we were able to buy more tools, because one thing we really wanted to capitalize on was having something that told us our students were engaged. We needed content curriculum that said our kids are engaging with us in this virtual environment. So I think that's the part that we can't lose. We were so very focused on engagement because, right after March 13th, teachers just kind of grabbed whatever they had, PDFs, people were scanning worksheets, they were doing, it was really horrible from a technology standpoint. Once everybody got devices and hotspots, and that was a whole thing. And Norma, I appreciate your efforts around that as well. But once everybody got something, we looked for digital resources that focused on student engagement. We need to know our kids are here, they're engaged in their learning, they're with us, they're excited about their learning. So now when you think about post-pandemic, why should that change? They still need to be here with us, engaged, involved, inspired by what they're doing, because we worked overtime to make sure that kids felt connected to us in the virtual environment. We can't lose that now. So I feel like we've got the tools down, like tools. There's not a teacher in Atlanta Public Schools that I can say, have you used Flipgrid lately? There's not a teacher that I could ask that question and they say, oh no, what is that? Everybody knows what Flipgrid is. Everybody knows what Nearpod is. We all got it down. But I challenge us now to look at tools in a very different way. How are we using technology to really elevate what students are doing? They should become producers with the technology, critical thinkers, entrepreneurs, problem solvers. You don't have to guide the work so much. Just kind of let that constructivist learning kind of happen and take place, but they're using that technology to get to where they need to go. We are in what they affectionately call now the Silicon Valley of the South. And we're realizing very quickly that our students are not prepared to go into that workforce. So we've done a lot to think through what the next phase of this will look like. And I just challenge any district that's kind of struggling post-pandemic to look at now this technology access in a very different way, where we empower the students, our instruction becomes very student-centered, and we just kind of let them take it, because now we've seen that they can do it. So that's one of the ways that we're going to change what we're doing.
Thank you, Aaliyah. You brought up two things, and I'm going to go first to Millie and then to Eunice, because you talked about how technology is used in making sure students are connected. There are two pieces to that. There are more than two, but two primary pieces, right? Do you have the infrastructure and the setup so that students at home can be connected, students in the classroom are connected, and the teacher can deliver instruction in a way that keeps students connected no matter where they are? The other piece of that is, how do you make learning relevant? What is it that engages them? So I'm going to go to Millie and say, you all have done a phenomenal job of being very forward thinking on uses of technology. How have you rethought what classrooms look like to carry you through the pandemic and beyond?
Well, basically, and before we play that video, because I do have a little video for you, kind of show you what, before we do that, we call this classroom of the future, but it was about a year ago when we were kind of preparing our teachers to come back in August of 2020 and teach in this hybrid classroom situation where you have students at home, as you can see there, and then you have students and families that decided that they wanted to come back. So we were kind of getting teachers into this concept of, this is what a classroom of the future looks like. I want to say that now this is the classroom of the present. And basically what it is and what we've been able to do over the past year is, we actually launched this in August of 2020, is we equipped all our classrooms, again, with the flat screen TVs, with the tracking cameras, for basically the teacher to still be that expert in the classroom. So rather than kind of relying on a digital space where you're giving students content and you're giving them assignments, this is what we call the remote live instruction piece, where students are at home, yet they have access to their teacher. They're getting that live instruction. And the teacher can actually work with the students in the actual physical setting and then still work with the students who are at home. I think the critical thing to this was that we didn't look at technology as a way to just replace learning. We kind of were looking at how do we equip our classrooms with this technology so that we give students that same sense of normalcy and we keep the substance and we keep them engaged. So I think the key there was they still get to connect with their peers, whether they're at home, because either they have, we have a lot of students whose families live with their grandparents, for example, and there was a lot of concern over students coming physically and getting ill, getting sick. We had a lot of those situations where parents were still very worried, or parents just wanted to keep their kids at home. So how do we make sure that they still got that quality education? So this was kind of what we did. And we created, the teacher has a microphone. So basically now our students can communicate, work in groups, same environment. I think the other critical piece was, even if they were home, videos had to be on. They had uniforms. And I know some people said, well, that's kind of crazy. The expectation was still that they wore their school uniform. The culture and the setting was the same, because we wanted to make sure that it's still a space in your home, but it's still during this time when you're logged in, you're engaged in school. And, there was still, if you didn't log in and you didn't come in, somebody would be calling you saying, hey, you haven't logged in. So we tried to make it so that it's still, we wanted to make sure we stay connected, as someone said, with our students. And I think when we were presenting this to our teachers, using the technology in that way allowed us to do that. The students could raise their hand, see their teacher, ask questions, connect with peers. And then, they set up office hours and things like that. But I think what we looked at this and what we did all year was, in this classroom of the future concept, was the fact that it was live instruction. It was instruction that you would otherwise get if you were physically at school. So both, parents could benefit from both settings. The other piece of that was the walkthroughs. The administrators still came into those rooms, are still conducting those walkthroughs, whether it was on the RLI space or not. And I think we kept, the accountability was there as well. So I think in our case, we don't feel that students lost learning. And we, our data shows that. But I think it was because we tried to keep that continuity. And then, just a little bit about that. When we look at it now going into 2021, we actually are framing our classrooms of the futures. We're keeping, it's not, like you said, we're not throwing the baby away with the bathwater, because what we found was, even when our teachers are out, even in just a regular situation where a teacher is homesick, they're still teaching. They're still able to get online. So we had situations that were backwards, where we'd have students physically in school, some students at home. You have the teacher logging on, and you may have there's a substitute in that physical room, but your teacher is still providing that content. We also noticed that if students, for whatever reason, they needed in the physical space to be absent that day, a parent had to go to work, they could still log on and be part of class. So it really provides avenues that you can continue to use regardless of the pandemic. And then the other big piece with this, it allows us, we learned that it also provided valuable experiences for our teachers, because now you could take a teacher that was struggling and say, okay, let's find the best algebra teacher in the network, whether that's across over in Nevada, and then you can zoom into that teacher's room. So now you can connect teachers, they can model lessons, they can come into that space through the RLI and actually get professional development. And it just, again, and even if the classroom sessions are recorded, that teacher can benefit. So we also found the benefit in connecting teachers into those classrooms, just across, different networks.
Thank you, Millie. I think I hope that innovation of your classrooms of the future are not lost on people, that this is an opportunity to, students may be home ill, maybe they've been exposed to COVID and they have to quarantine, even if they themselves are not ill. They may have reasons why they can't come in at a particular time. Teachers, the professional development, the connectedness of adults Teachers often talk about the feeling of isolation. You go into your room, you close the door, and it's your room and you're by yourself. Technology can blow the doors off of that, can allow for collaboration, can allow for folks to be scheduled in a way that they see what's happening in other classrooms and be paired up with colleagues. There is so much opportunity that technology can provide to support great teaching and learning, continuity of learning. And, there was learning loss, certainly, but there were also very bright spots. Some, what I used to call when I worked in philanthropy, we used to call them islands of excellence. And one of the things that we hope to do with this coalition is to find those islands of excellence, raise them up as examples, and show people that they don't have to be islands, that they can be translated to other contexts, that we can find what's really working for students of color and spread those best practices. UNIS Big Picture Learning has a very unique way that you work with students and schools delivering instruction and providing educational opportunities for kids. And real life learning and connectedness is a big part of that. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you've seen happening?
Yeah, I'm gonna borrow your words here and say, I think we at Big Picture Learning, to know us is to love us. And we see our role as helping people blow the doors off, as you said, of what we think about when we think about learning and schools. And so if you gave me an hour, I would really walk you through who we are and what we believe. But in a shorter period of time, I think if I can take a step back away from technology for a second, I'll jump back in, hold me to it, Lydia. It's relationships. What gets lost in all of this work is relationships. We get so caught up in tests and curriculum maps and we lose focus on, at the end of the day, you're teaching Millie. At the end of the day, you're teaching Norma. Like, it's a human being that you're touching, right? So that's where we start. And we start with helping young people find their voice enough to say, name and claim how they want to design their lives. And that usually translates into students going out into the real world. So we literally knock the doors off, not literally, but we say, hey, learning can't be confined in a building. It is a community that we need to tap. And I think one of our greatest desires is to really engage in the deep work, the equity work that is the opportunity gap. And so relationships is a way of doing that, exposure is a way of doing that, and building real social capital and networks. And so I'm going to ignore the fact that I could talk about advisory for a moment and how that could be real, not just a time where you talk about their grades, which not every kid wants to talk about, particularly if I'm not doing well. I'm going to ignore the fact that we could talk about exhibitions where students are able to present what they've learned, not a pencil and paper. I'm going to take a guess and choose C 10 times because that might get me the results, but truly telling you what I know, the questions I'm having that are about something that I've chosen to learn about. And I'm going to jump right into the opportunity to go out in the real world. So at Big Picture Learning, that's what we do. We help schools think about, what would it mean for your kids to get out? So in a high school setting, mostly, students are out on internships, often 2 days out of the week, not coming to school at all, totally going to an internship, working with a mentor who's an adult that has something going on that I, as a student, am super interested in. It's an interest, it's a passion, it's a concern, it's whatever it is. I'm going to spend quality time twice a week out there learning, formulating my own questions, doing my own research, unpacking that and bringing that back into the school to learn some more. Again, didn't talk about advisory, but a place where it could sit. And that experience counts as learning. So again, we're talking, I always get a little bit peeved when I ask a person, hey, what do if you ask a person, what do they teach? And they say math. And I'm like, no, you don't. You teach students. Like, math is just a subject, and it's going to change and evolve a bit, maybe math not as much, but things grow and evolve. So we really have to focus on centering around students. So technology. So we talk to schools about technology as a tool. Millie, you hit it on the head, and Aaliyah, you hit it on the head too. Young people, when you sit them in class and talk about English only, and then they switch and they talk about math only and they switch, they lose the connection. But when they go out in the real world and recognize that public speaking is a little bit writing and customer service is a little bit, writing in English or what have you, they start to make connections for themselves. we have a platform that we've used in the last, we've been using it prior to COVID and the pandemic, called Emblaze. And it has been a tool that doesn't replace people, but a management system for internships. So schools and districts have decided, if I can have a way of understanding and feeling secure that my students are out safely at these different places, if I can have a way to understand how I navigate walking a student from an interest to actually finding a person in the real world, if I can have a way of communicating hours and documenting that the kid was there for 10 hours, then I would be willing. Again, to know big picture, to love big picture, then I think people are like, big question mark, how do I do it? So Emblaze is one tool that we have that supports schools thinking about an internship process. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we do this work in middle and elementary schools as well, really thinking about, again, knocking down the walls and inviting the community in to teach and center what's going on in real time in our communities so that students can engage in that. And often that little small, that move creates light bulbs and opportunities that you would never imagine. The last thing I'll mention is, again, we recognize that the opportunity gap and replacing that obviously with the achievement gap speaks to the fact that the system needs to change. And all of us on this call are a part of that system. So to the extent that we just decide we need to do this differently, and our kids are deserving of it, and that we don't have to fit into this box that has been pre-described, centuries ago. And our students need exposure. Often, in marginalized communities, it's the opportunity to see and experience, just like Aaliyah, you said, seeing those professionals and having a network. It's who you know. Unfortunately, in this world right now, it is who you know, because people are willing to give a chance on someone they know and that they have a relationship with, that they can say, hey, my man, come on over here. Why'd you do, like, I can talk to you. It's not this foreign thing. So how do we change that? How do we kind of disrupt that and give young people, particularly in marginalized communities, a new network that they haven't had before? And it starts with, internships, period. I can end right there. Just giving them the chance to get out there and meet people, and it changes lives every day. So I think we continue to, our Emblaze is continue to evolve. I'll give you the last piece, which is really new, hot off the press. We're doing something called Unbound. Probably shouldn't even be talking about it, but it's public now. And it's taking this idea and saying, well, what if it doesn't all have to fit into a student going out into the real world? It could be online and virtual, something that we've learned. So what if we are connecting right now, and Millie and I, after this call, kept it going, right? So we could start a new connection, and it doesn't have to necessarily be bound by a school. Like, you could do that after school. So Unbound is looking at, sometimes schools struggle to accommodate and transform in this way. And as activists, we're doing it anyway. We're going to blow these doors off. So how do we bring it to the community? And that's what we're doing.
Thank you, Eunice. One of the things that we've certainly experienced with the schools we work with is we have to find a connection with the parents in order to support learning for students. And I think working with technology has amplified that need. In some ways, it's made connecting with parents easier. When students have a device and that device is at home, you can often use it to send messages from the teacher to the parent and vice versa. We have some schools that we work with that have been doing virtual town halls in the evening and doing breakout rooms on Zoom by native language, so they don't need to use a translator. Finding those innovative ways of connecting parents is really important. Norma, parents needed digital skills, adults needed digital skills. Can you talk a little bit about, what have you seen and where do they get those?
Sure. So as a nonprofit that's been focused on the digital divide, we've had the opportunity to work closely with a variety of organizations that work closely with K-12 households. For example, we've worked with a number of public housing agencies throughout the country where we see the highest level of poverty and folks being unconnected and not having the digital skills that they need. And so it's through those partnerships, and also with partnerships like with groups out in California, like Para los Niños. You may be familiar with them. They're also a charter school network. They provide after-school programming support for families. Because of the pandemic, we've been working even more closely with them to ensure that their families do have the the skill set, but also the confidence to navigate technology. Because all of a sudden, as you mentioned, families found themselves needing to learn new vocabulary. What's Wi-Fi? What's a data cap? What's a router? What's a student portal? And how do I access that? Do I need an email address? So all of those sort of challenges they were confronted with all of a sudden. And so it's been great to work with groups like Para los Niños in order to use those anecdotes to help inform our curriculum in an effort to really develop a digital skills training that meets their particular needs. And not only teaches them digital skills or how to use an email address, but also apply that in the real world. So now that you've built these skills and confidence, how do you communicate with the teacher using your new email address? How do you access the parent portal? But also, how do you access other essential services? Like a lot of our services, have moved online. If you want to, recertify for the National School Lunch Program or apply for food benefits or even apply for public housing and participate in the census, as we saw last year, it's all digital, right? So we're helping parents not only feel comfortable with doing things online for their student purposes and their educational growth, but also for their own personal successes as well. So really happy that we're building those kind of partnerships more and more with K through 12 serving institutions, because our curriculum is really reflecting the needs of their parents. So I'm excited about those kind of activities. And just to give you a sense of participation rate, because we're offering these digital skills training in a virtual format, we keep it intimate, right? We want to make sure that parents, when they come to the virtual classroom, they feel comfortable to ask questions, so that our instructors could really help them navigate through their new tablet or new laptop and learn the browser, as an example. So we keep it intimate. We've had now over 10 cohorts of 15 people in the matter of 3 months, because the demand for learning digital skills is so high. Parents they want to learn. They want to know how to use these new skills and tools for purposes of supporting their student, but also for themselves. So we're really excited about these kind of partnerships. And there's tons of resources out there as well. We've developed our own digital skills curriculum that, again, we customize around the needs of parents. But there's tons of other resources out there that folks can access. And I'll drop some in the chat box in case folks want to share that out with their parents.
Thank you, Norma. I know we're starting to run short on time. We have so much good information coming from the panel. I want to go to audience questions and then tie a few things together. If you're in the audience, can you please enter a question in the chat if you have one for all the panelists or anyone in particular? I'll give it a minute of wait time, and I'll also say it is clear from hearing from you all, right, that when we think about what makes a great educational opportunity and experience for a student, it isn't just one thing or two things. It's really thinking holistically about the supports they need. What is their experience in the classroom? Are their families able to support their learning experience? Is it relevant to them? Do they feel connected to an adult who cares? Is there an adult who is able to guide their learning, who has been trained, who has the supports that they need? Are they in a physical environment, like a classroom of the future that allows them to be at home, to be in school, to continue learning, and where they are does not limit the opportunity that they have to continue improving and absorbing and participating? I don't see any questions in the chat. Do you know how to bring broadband to rural communities? Well, I'm going to kick that one to Norma.
That is a big question, and one that is not, unfortunately, easily answered. As you know, it really comes down to an infrastructure need there to really support the deployment of the connectivity that's needed. And I'm happy that the new administration is really taking a deeper close at this. There have been legislation and also bills that are now supporting funding the deployment of the infrastructure that's needed, especially in rural communities. So I wish I had a better answer than that, but I think we're starting to see the movement in the right direction in terms of making sure that every community across the country really has robust access. And if you want to learn more about that space, you could follow the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. They're one of the national organizations that are made up of digital inclusion practitioners and other institutions that are taking a look at this issue through a policy perspective.
Thank you, Norma. The other thing that we've been thinking about or talking about is equity. Right? How do you use technology to create equitable opportunities? Aaliyah, when you're thinking about teaching and learning at Atlanta Public Schools, I know that you and your team have spent a lot of time thinking about equitable outcomes and how technology can help you achieve those. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like in Atlanta?
Yeah, I think it's probably the future of instruction in our district. And I want to say this, just a caveat before we jump into it. I don't think that technology is necessary all the time in the instructional process. I mean, it's a great thing and I love it and I champion it every day, but it's not necessary. There's always time and appropriate times for offline instruction, especially since we've had so much screen time, But personalized learning, I think, is going to be the way that we really approach some kind of equitable outcomes. Really, if we try to address all of the gaps in learning that students have that just vary from student to student in a classroom, we called it differentiation at one point. There are different names for it. But in our district, we're really trying to understand and learn who that student is, understanding the student interest, and that being a data point, not letting just their test score be the only data point, and then educate them based on their voice and giving them some choice around how they demonstrate their mastery of learning. Everybody is not a great test taker. I, for one, I'm really a visual learner. When people are talking too much, my mind goes to my grocery list and all the other things that I need to do. So kids, it's the same thing. We want kids to really understand and embrace their learning style. So they may have a different way to demonstrate to you what their mastery, how they've mastered this particular topic. And also not stay so tightly knit to the pacing of curriculum. We want to have flexible content and flexible tools to go along with that content. So if Lydia has mastered mixed numbers and fractions, she can go on, she can move on, but we're not going to move Aaliyah just because it's time to move to the next thing. In terms of pacing, we need flexibility around that. So we're exploring some of those different things so that every learner gets everything that they need. And it's really personalized to them. So that's one of the ways that we're going to leverage technology to really create some equitable academic outcomes for kids. But that's going to be, lots of training, a culture change. But I think our teachers are ready for something new. Like coming off of the pandemic, this is the perfect time to say, guys, we realize we can do something different. And this is the opportunity that we're going to take in Atlanta Public Schools to kind of change that mindset of what curriculum, what pacing, and what instruction can look like.
So I think, Aaliyah, you answered this question, what did you learn from virtual learning that will be kept, right? That's what you're keeping. Millie, I'm going to throw this next question to you, and then I'm going to ask you all for a very brief closing thought. But the question is from the audience, from Patricia, wondering how you're addressing the social emotional trauma lived by students and their families. And I know you all have a mentoring program that you work on that addresses that.
And I think we've had to address that on both fronts. It wasn't just the students and the parents, it was also the teachers as well at a certain point. Everybody kind of had their break point. But I think the first, piece for us and how we handled that was initially at the beginning, it was really that stress of parents, like you said, who didn't have internet, who didn't have a way, who didn't know how to log on. We had a lot of families where the parents still had to go to work because they were still essential workers. And now you were leaving the child with a grandparent who didn't speak English, had never even seen a computer. So even though they had the laptops and they had the access, early on, we had a lot of, stress around logging on. And again, I heard someone say that, I think Eunice mentioned, even just submitting Google Docs, even just submitting homework. So what we basically got teams together in different schools and gave parents kind of like an emergency access line. So you still had parents could call the school, could call someone. The lines were forwarded to somebody's home, but we had people that were still kind of that crisis team in a sense to just deal with somebody calling and says, I can't log on. I don't know what, as a parent, I don't know what I'm doing. We also had every teacher connected to the student as well. The students had the teacher's email address. They had a phone number. So if a student was trying to get on and had trouble, then, instead of losing the entire day, they had access to their teacher. So I think in that sense, our teachers stepped up and staff stepped up to kind of like relieve some of that stress. As we started kind of getting deeper into an entire year of really because the majority of our students were home for the beginning. What started happening as they saw that this was working, they started now asking, can we come back? Can we come back to school? So we were surveying parents as we went along. But I think when the social emotional, we had a lot of students, and like I'm sure it happened with everyone, we had a lot of cases of, in our schools already, we had cases of students, right, with issues and depression and suicidal thoughts. So now that escalated because now you have these students and now they're home. And we had students who, after a while, we did, just like many other people, weren't logging in or weren't coming, So one other big piece of this is we did COVID, we did visits, we did home visits. We tracked our kids down because I think the critical piece was just, like I said, keeping track of what was going on. And kids knew that. So even the kids that were doing fine, just didn't feel like logging in one day, kind of knew you're going to get a phone call. We're going to be on you, just like we are every day in school. And with the student populations that we work with, that's what they need. And that's what they want. They want they want that person who cares, is worried about them. So we've done this in the past, but this year our program, we have an advisory period, and it's not your typical homeroom. What we've use that advisory period is every student in the physical day is assigned a mentor, and we call it, and it's not necessarily academic, it's just their mentor. And in that time frame throughout the day, they get to connect with that mentor. So you might have 15, 20 students to a class. Not everyone is a teacher. It could be a staff member that's been trained to do this. It could be the school treasurer. Everybody at a certain period of the day for 30 minutes has certain students that go to them. And that person knows what's going on with each of their students, what's happening. So that's kind of where we were getting the information. So if a student wasn't comfortable because now they're at home in RLI, they're not going to get on the chat and say, hey, I'm depressed, or hey, they had that time regardless with that phone call with that mentor, hey, what's going on? And that's the relationship piece that I know Eunice talked about. That is big for us. Like they kept that connection, and that kind of really helped us navigate which students we really needed to support. That also gave us data on which students we needed to bring back right away. Which students can we talk to the families and say there is a need, whether it's academic or there's just a need for us to provide tutoring on site or one-to-one. So we were working kind of along with getting that feedback. And then in that program, in that advisory program, what we started doing, and we do use, somebody mentioned Nearpod, we've used their social and emotional learning curriculum, and we implemented that within the advisory period. So we've now made it a curriculum. So that social emotional learning, Nearpod has been a good one. Other schools have used other different type of programs, but it's now embedded within the school day for that portion of the program. That doesn't mean if the mentor feels that, I need to talk to the student today, there's something going on, and that's where that time is given. So I think Eunice mentioned it. So I was like sitting here going, because that's exactly what we do. And that's a way to make sure that we are getting to every student, that not, there isn't a case where we may not know about it. So it's kind of like a divide and conquer, but everyone's on board to making sure that our students are okay and that what they need are met. And to that point, I know we mentioned this early on, but it's interesting because when we first went into the pandemic, we're a VIL school. Our middle school programs, most of our middle schools are in Verizon Innovative Learning. So thank God for that, because they had the one-to-one access, right? So we were serving our high school students and determining what percentage, what do we need to make sure they're going to be fine. We had a really high rate of high school students, almost like 60%, who did not have access at home. Yet we found that high school students, older students, and minority students particularly, are embarrassed to say that. So we only found that through these mentors, through, because we had sent out surveys and that wasn't communicated in the surveys for those older students. They're embarrassed. They're embarrassed to say, hey, I have no internet at home, or I don't have a way to access. So it was through that mentor, our mentors were coming saying, hey, these kids don't have a way to log on. So again, the relationship piece is big.
Thank you, Millie. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know we could go on for hours and hours. I'm going to give everyone an opportunity to do like 10 seconds. One parting thought. If there's something you wanted people to walk away with, what is it? I'll start with you, Norma.
Well, I think what we've learned is that it's important to leverage a lot of the models that are already out there and working, and to really address these issues through a collective impact model. So meaning really collaborating with cross-sector organizations. These are not issues that could be taken on alone by schools and charter school networks. It really takes philanthropy, the private sector, the nonprofit sector, and our government, right, to support these efforts. So I think coalitions like this is why this work really matters, because it elevates these conversations and what's already working.
Thank you, Norma. Aaliyah?
I was going to say grace. Give yourselves grace, give the students grace, give the parents grace. This has been a heck of a year on a number of levels. We don't know. Our kids are coming back changed. They're not the same kids. We've had kids that have missed a whole grade level in terms of maturity. They're leaving elementary and they're showing back up in middle school. So grace would be my word for the next year. And that applies to everyone who's involved in education of students and the students themselves.
Thank you, Aaliyah. Millie?
I guess what we should all take away is that the only constant is change, and that's not going to change. So I think we sit here, like I said, last year, I said we called our system and how we were doing everything classroom of the future. And now for this presentation, it's classrooms of the now. And now we're looking at ways in how we're opening a new school now, and our classrooms are innovative lab spaces without even desks, because we're looking at ways in ways where we can have our students create and become kind of the owners of their own ways of using technology. So our classrooms for next year will be completely different than what you just saw here. So I think we have to embrace the fact that curriculum is constantly changing. If we're really saying we're going to prepare kids to be 21st century learners, are we really doing that? Are we changing with the times? And I think our teachers learned that valuable lesson, but many, even our veteran teachers, learned that they can always adapt and they can change and learn new things. And that's a wonderful thing. It's growth mindset. So I think as long as we continue to embrace that, the world keeps changing and we're just going to keep growing with it.
Thank you, Millie. Eunice?
Mad that I only get 10 seconds, but I'll say this. A lot has been said, and I think the work that we're doing is equity work. And I was not name dropping, but I was in a conversation with Nicole, or heard Nicole Hannah-Jones talking, and she said that the system is designed as it was meant to be. And so if we truly want to do something different, we got to dismantle this and build anew. So stop using the language of refresh, redefine, reform. No, brand new. We got to build it up. I will leave two thoughts around that. Number one, we should be asking the question, according to whom? Students are successful, according to whom? Students are engaged, according to whom? Students are achieving, according to whom? Students are career ready, according to whom? When we ask that question, we might invite new ideas so that we can build. And the last thing I'll offer is something that Norma already said. We got to invite people to the table, or get rid of the table and again, build anew. But we have to have students, we have to have parents, we have to have community members in the conversations about what we are building together. So according to whom, and let's get a new table.
Thank you, Eunice. I couldn't say it any better, so I'm not going to say anything else. Thank you all for coming today. Thank you for participating in our Rise Up Coalition webinar. That concludes our session today. Join us next week for History Matters, honoring Indigenous teaching and learning models. Thank you all, and talk to you soon.